Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael DelGiorno and David Zanotti.
People are starting to realize that all of the major news publications really are aligned to scare people into doing what they say to save democracy. Is it too soon to say, "We told you so"?
So this is a giant I told you so. You know, we don't like to do that, but I can't help it. I'm out of control on this one. I wake up, I read this story from the Associated Press, and I cannot believe what they actually wrote. Again, we've been talking about the AP and the role that the Associated Press plays in dominating the stories that print and media and all kinds of news services have used. And we've talked about that, goes way back to the 1800s and blah, blah, blah. Then the shift over the last couple of years, how AP has started taking private foundation funds from organizations that have high-level agendas. And that suddenly the Associated Press now appears to be this missionary outreach for the purpose of saving democracy. Well, then you start to analyze what's the definition of democracy based upon what they're writing about, and it appears to be human autonomy, abortion, global climate change, and basically anything that the Democrat Party says is good is now defined as democracy and must be saved from everyone who disagrees.
Now, if you can set that game up, that's a good game to play if you're them.
Yeah, and if it was happening on the right, it'd be called cult.
Okay. Well, we talked about like things like climate change and abortion becoming almost religious. By definition, they are. Yeah. Well, this is actually sounding more cult-like.
Well, and here's the thing. I'm so blessed to have the opportunity to work with you on so many different ways in radio, but particularly on your morning show. But we have limited time to talk about it there.
And so I have to just do a disclaimer. When he says your morning show, he doesn't mean a morning show that belongs to me. That's the name of the show. Your morning
YMS.
show.
Yeah, which I love. Your morning show with Michael DelGiorno. Okay. But we have such limited time. So when we get together for these conversations, a lot of times I'm bouncing ideas off of you that are really popping right up out of the journals and out of the conversations that we're having with staff people and people around the country. This is a cult. And I know this might be dangerous to say where people are able to overhear it, but it's either the church of democracy or the cult of democracy. I don't know which one, but it is a religious passion of total absorption. And the irony is, these people are supposed to be journalists. They call themselves journalists.
Well, but you stated something that I found fascinating, and that is, by the way, everybody should take a moment and soak that in. A church of democracy or a cult of democracy. That is a great way to describe it. And what you're going to find is that the cult leader is clearly the Atlantic and the Associated Press. The Associated Press self-admitted. They even tell you where the money's coming from and the agenda.
So, yeah, and if you think about D.C., now all I can think of is democracy cult. That's all I can think of, is these people have now got, with religious fervor, an alignment of all of their different organizations marching in the same direction. They are actually the banner carriers for the Democrat Party. And you said something the other day that really, it's so obvious. And I just need to be reminded of it. They have been working on eliminating the word republic from our country for years. And all kinds of academics have said, oh, don't worry about it. Republic and democracy they're kind of synonymous. No, they're not. They never have been. And now we've got a situation where the Democrat Party is sort of absorbed in the democracy cult. So you got Joe Biden running around the country saying he's here to save the soul of democracy and the soul of the nation. Now you got the Associated Press lining up all of their competitors saying, guess what? We're no longer competitors. We're now all on the same page. Axios and Associated Press and the Atlantic Monthly and the New York Times, all of these organizations are now working in harmony together. And we have projects now we do together to protect democracy. Oh.
So here's the story in ABC. And it is a We Told You So. But beyond that, it clearly, beyond the story they're even telling, look what's demonstrated in the title, the headline. journalists tackle a political what if. So now journalism is dead. We don't cover what's the news. Now we're even into what ifs. There's that.
Yeah, not who, what, why, where. Now it's who, what, oh, what if?
And if you scroll down, it clearly gives you the Washington Post outlined plans by Trump and allies to use federal government to punish opponents. The Associated Press has written extensively about the implications of Trump's campaign rhetoric. Politico Jack Schaefer wrote about Trump's recipe for a shockingly raw power grab. Axios collected speculation on the possibility of staffing of a second Trump administration. Can you say Vice President Tucker Carlson? I mean, it's just insanity. But it's what it reveals. It reveals that if this is a church or cult of democracy, well, its high priest is the Associated Press, the Atlantic, Axios, and some of these others.
Yeah.
So it's what it reveals, and just in plain sight. But what I'm concerned about, David, is just as they have hijacked democracy, and democracy has become the Democratic Party platform, and anybody opposes democracy, now you're an insurrectionist. I fear that there's not enough conversation about that we're a republic. I saw one in the Washington Post, and it was to calm everybody's fears about a dictatorship. He's basically showing you we're a government of laws, and we have checks and balances, and the president doesn't have that power to do that. There's not enough talk of that. And what I fear is that eventually the answer to this democracy cult will become a Republican republic cult. And that would get us just par for the course, 2 steps in the wrong direction rather than a righting.
Okay, now tell me what that means. That's interesting. What does that mean?
Well, because we know we're all living in our tribes and we're all living in our silos, right? So every day I could take the 5 top stories and I can show you the left's narrative of them and the right's narrative of them. This week was a great example. The right is talking about the drumbeat towards an impeachment of Biden, the latest indictments of Hunter Biden. It's getting closer and closer to dad and $1 million that we can't account for. If you go to the other side, it's about, now the Supreme Court may rush this, so it goes to court prior to the primaries, let alone the general election. Those that are investigating Donald Trump, not to mention we got the secret witness from Mar-a-Lago. So it's like simultaneous alternate realities playing out at once. So if the left is playing democracy as the Democrat,
this is so messed up.
It is. It's an illness. It's end times kind of confusion. But here's the point. Will the response be the Republicans in the name of republic counter the democracy cult in the name of the Democratic Party platform? Because that would be 2 wrongs, not a right.
Yeah, and this gets really confusing because in addition to having the nomenclature, the words change in our lifetimes in meaning, where republic was what was established out of our Declaration and our Constitution. That's the form of government. Now republic means republicanism in regards to a political party.
Nativism, America first.
And then it's redefined
bigoted,
and reshaped.
Biased. Yeah.
Democracy was a process. It was a part of how a republic functioned and had to deal with the concept of equality and franchise, how we look at each other and how we participate in the voting process. Now that's all been translated into the word democracy means Democrat, which means party. We have been completely subjected to false reality, a reality upon which this country was not built. Now, this is true. This is true history. We didn't have political parties functioning in this country until the 3rd presidential election, actually the 3rd administration. We didn't have them through the 2 elections of Washington for the presidency and John Adams.
Right.
And it took until we got to Jefferson. And it went bad and it got worse, and it's only gotten worse since then. The only times where we've stopped thinking that way in times of profound crisis, World War I, World War II, those are the only points in time where we stopped thinking in that formula. Now, as the federal government has grown in size and dollars, where the federal government today in the United States is the largest budget in the world, and it is controlled by 535 people. They've divided up that group of people into 2 teams. Whoever has more votes in the House and the Senate has the final say on dividing up that massive budget. This is not the way America was supposed to be. Now, they sell us politics every day down the pipeline and personalities. But in the end, it's about controlling the funding of the budget and the administrative state through which it is appropriated. And that is pure power.
If you control the budget, you control the people. I think
It's pure power.
it's fascinating. The founding fathers did it brilliantly. People forget this, but the House of Representatives takes into account population. So it's the people's house. And that's why every state has different numbers of members of the House of Representatives. The Senate was to represent the states' rights. Boy, how we've conflated it more.
No matter how large or small, every state got
has
to
two,
and still gets
equality.
to. Yeah.
And then, of course, you had the executive branch, which just executes what the House and the will of the people is to protect the people at its will. But this has morphed into something far different and far more dangerous. And you brought up, they conditioned. Carefully, Barack Obama kept referring to us as a democracy. Few people stood up and went, does he not know that we're a constitutional republic? Of course he did. He's a constitutional attorney. He was the Harvard Law Review leader.
And now he's a collectivist. And he was trying to say not only is America a democracy, but it's a collectivist socialist country.
And, people didn't challenge it. People didn't challenge it. And then it became about democracy. And anybody that opposes it is an insurrectionist. But here's what I think the big play is. To take a two-party stranglehold and debate and created it into a two forms of government country. Which makes the choice, the solution is still the same. The people and the people's house must choose which government they're going to serve. Ultimately, the people end up being the solution. And if you choose whatever this democracy, church, or cult is, well, then you will reap what you sow. But it's up to the people to choose. But the stakes get higher. Instead of it being a divided states of America based on two very strong parties, they've made it about two different forms of government just in case the two-party system ever caves. I sense something much bigger afoot.
Well, yeah, and that's why I love both our friendship and our ability to work together and to serve the country together, because I love the instincts and the analysis that you have. So let's go one more step on this. Here's the biggest, maybe the biggest con of all, is people will now run away and say, okay, I'm for the republic. I'm for the founding. I'm for the way that this government's supposed to work. Therefore, I'm going to vote for the Republican Party. Meanwhile, the people back in the big house in Washington, D.C., who exists to only control the money and the power, they could care less about that argument.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they can use it to get more seats than the Democrats, they'll tell you whatever you want to hear. But when it comes time to setting the policy and spending the money, guess what? They're every bit as corrupt as the other guys. They don't believe that stuff. They just use it to hold power.
Love the way you lay that out. Okay, so I'm going to side with our founding fathers. I'm going to side with a government of, for, and by the people, a representative republic, a republic of laws. Therefore, I'm going to vote for. You said Republican Party, which gets back to my initial fear that they're just going to respond now with a republic that is Republican to counter set a democracy, which is the Democrat Party platform. But as you were saying those, you know what went through my head in a flash? I'm going to side with our founding fathers. I'm going to side with the republic. Therefore, I'm going to vote for Robert Kennedy Jr.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought right there.
Do you need an explosion sound effect?
Hold that thought right there.
When you subscribe to 1850 Main Street, you're the first to find out what's happening next with new guests, publications, and events. And when you spread the word about 1850 Main Street, you're helping others find real answers to the real questions facing America right now. To learn more, visit 1850mainstreet.com. And please, tell a friend.
Now, with that positioned, let me go ahead and take this one last piece from the left. You just staked out the middle. I had staked out what would be perceived as the right. Let's stake out the left. The same game is played by the people in the big house at the Capitol building on the Democrats. They divide the nation and divide their constituencies based upon race, upon people who've been offended or damaged or disenfranchised. They base it on poverty and wealth. They have a tribe for Wall Street. They have a tribal headquarters for Hollywood. They have their tribes, and they make all kinds of promises to them. But then when they get the vote and they get the power, they don't deliver either. It's a perfect example, the war on poverty since 1965, the trillions and trillions of dollars that have been spent.
Greatest economic failure in political world history.
Are the same people, now the people that were buying it in 1965 are mostly dead now. I understand that. But take a look at the heirs and the families and the cities and the regions. Has the war on poverty delivered anyone out of those circumstances? And the answer is no. What it's done is to impoverish all the more people who now are paying higher percentages of taxes across the board everywhere. Who were the big winners? The people who work for the government, the people who have government jobs. And who do those people vote for? They vote for the Democrats because they want to continue to get the stuff they've got from government. It is a game of power and control. And all the political messaging that's out here in the hinterlands is they joke about that stuff. Michael, I've sat in meetings with chiefs of staffs, members of Congress on Capitol Hill, and I hear how they talk about the folks back home and the fires that they have to put out back home of the constituents. I'm telling you.
The nuisance of back home, not the priority
I'm
of back
telling
home.
you, this is a power cult.
So the New Deal, bookended by the Great Society, the Great War on poverty, has just trapped people in poverty or paid them just enough that they'll choose to stay in poverty and enslaved the rest of America because there are now more tax receivers and taxpayers to pay for it all. Not to mention, in terms of entitlements, Social Security, Medicare are unsustainable. And nobody's addressing Social Security, which is unsustainable literally by the end of the decade, and no one's discussing it. And then you have this whole big movement of the church or cult of democracy versus the republic of Republicans and conflating forms of government with actual parties in their stranglehold, or the ultimate insurance, which is if we can get you to switch to two forms of government from two parties, it doesn't matter even if they collapse. In the midst of all that, it's an election year, and an election year that we're going broke in. How does this all play out? Well, there's one thing that they haven't counted on. Just like in 2016, they didn't count on Trump coming down the escalator. They didn't count on him knocking off 19 Republicans in a primary. In fact, they laughed at it till the joke was on them, and he became president. You know, I firmly believe two individuals that were never supposed to be president of the United States were John F. Kennedy and Donald Trump. And I got news for you. One ended up dead, and the other is in the process of a slow political assassination to show you what happens when you cross their fate. They've got another one in their crosshairs. And I played this on your morning show. I want you to listen to this. This is the CNN political chief explaining to Dana Bosch about what happens when you look at Michigan voters and you add Robert Kennedy. Listen.
I just want to show you in Michigan specifically, Dana, look what happens when you add in these independent third-party kind of candidates. Trump's number goes down too, but Biden's number goes down real low. So 39% for Trump, 31% for Biden, RFK Jr. pulling 20% in Michigan, Cornel West getting 6% right now. That, in addition to Donald Trump having some strength, clearly, this is another threat coming at Joe Biden from another direction.
I think it's a threat coming at a two-party stranglehold or somebody trying to make you make a two-government stranglehold. David, this may be the wild card they're not expecting. Robert Kennedy. I got news for you. Ross Perot wasn't polling at 20%. In fact, didn't have any notoriety until the debates with Bush and Clinton. This is the factor like Trump, like Kennedy, they didn't see coming.
Kennedy has multiple lanes opening up to him. If he chooses to expose the conspiracy of all of the media ganging up on Trump to basically say he'll be a dictator, he'll be a dictator, he'll be a dictator. He has that lane to expose their hypocrisy. But then he also has the rush to the bottom, the race to the bottom from both sides now. And Michael, what's happening with all of these court proceedings, the impeachments and the indictments and the trials and all that's going on is everybody's looking for discovery. Everybody's trying to get into the legal files to be able to get the emails from the other side to be able to prove where the other side's lying. Now, in a courtroom with Donald Trump, all that stuff is going to have to come out, though the Democrats and the prosecution are trying to restrict discovery from Trump's team to be able to actually present the totality of the data. But on the other side, as they move toward a Biden impeachment, they will have opportunities to get witnesses and materials that will change this debate. In Kennedy's case, the more accelerated that gets, the more disgusted people are going to get. They might actually say, you know, I'm tired of both these people. I'm tired of all of this nonsense. Let's just get somebody who wants to fix problems and help us run the country.
Project the peak of that chaos, frustration, and sick of it. Right about convention time.
Exactly. Right about convention time.
And the Democrats, because, you know, every 50 years, we just keep repeating history. Here comes, like in 68, the convention in Chicago with a very divided party, not just over Israel, but over race and immigration, because the immigrants are getting all the money and they're taking it away. And in Chicago, where they're the most angry, is where the convention will take place. Then the Republicans, of course, whether it's Trump or someone else, will have the challenge of uniting their party. And then you start the general debates, and here comes Robert Kennedy right down the middle. I think there's something unexpected coming. And I didn't even bring up, you know, look at Michigan, 39% Trump, 31% Biden. So much for if you add a third party, the Perot effect will kill Trump. No, it kills Biden. But what you ought to really look at is Bobby Kennedy's within 11 points of Biden, and he's only 19 behind Trump. And nobody's even focused on him, and his campaign hasn't even begun.
And that's in the state of Michigan. So what about other states? And again, the Electoral College possibilities here are fascinating. But let me come back to a quote I sent you a while ago. This is from C.S. Lewis in the work That Hideous Strength. And it points to the entire regime that we now have, led by the Associated Press and all of the aligned leftist publications, including the Washington Post and the Atlantic. All the big guns are now aligned in a consortium to terrify Americans that Trump will be a dictator, therefore do what we say or you perish, or democracy dies. Okay, what about this doesn't sound right? But listen to this quote. Now, That Hideous Strength is a book everybody should read. It's the third part of the science fiction trilogy that Lewis wrote. And you don't have to like sci-fi, because I don't, to be able to see this. Lewis was writing after World War II and writing about the totalitarian regimes that were now dominating the end of the 20th century, which resulted in the murders and the execution of over 22 million lives. This was one of the darkest periods of the human planet. It was one of the worst times of all. So Lewis wrote this story about a technocracy taking over control, a group of elites figuring out how they could manipulate the public to releasing their personal responsibilities and just following what the government says. And there's a debate, an argument that goes on in the story about who you really have to win over to become that kind of totalitarian technocracy. And someone's challenging the leadership about how they should be writing in the newspapers. And the main story character in the book, That Hideous Strength, is hired to be a reporter and a journalist. So here's how he's being chastised. Why, you fool? It's the educated reader who can be gulled or, in essence, deceived. It's the educated reader who can be deceived. All our difficulty comes with the others. When did you meet a workman who believes the newspapers? He takes it for granted that they're all propaganda and skips the leading articles. He buys his paper for football results and the little paragraphs about girls falling out of windows and corpses found in Mayfair Flats. He is our problem. We have to recondition him. But the educated public, the people who read the highbrow weeklies, don't need reconditioning. They're all right already. They'll believe anything.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.